Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte.
Earlier this week, we took you to meet the new artists in residence.
Who happen to be old.
At American International College, planet Earth's favorite octogenarian rock and roll chorus base right here in Western Mass, Young at Heart.
Well, the Young at Heart Chorus will be performing with young artists from the School for Contemporary Dance and Thought in Northampton this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we'll talk with SCDT Director Jen Pollins and Young at Heart Directors Bob Silman and Julia Van Eycken.
And it's Thursday. That's when Congressman McGovern joins us. We'll talk about the New Hampshire primaries, the danger of AI this election season, and how the Democratic Party is starting to stand up to President Biden when it comes to support of Netanyahu.
But first, were you close? It was often the first question asked of our next guest whenever someone found out that her brother had passed away. That question haunted her and begged for a deeper answer.
Northampton's Anne Pikerton is the author of the book Were You Close? In it, she invites the reader along on her own journey as she searches for a greater understanding about who her brother was, why his passions were worth risking everything, and how to carry on in the world and in her family without him.
Thank you for joining us, Anne.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. It was a pleasure to read.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and the second I picked up the book and saw what it said on it, A Sister's Quest to Know the Brother She Lost, I immediately, gagged.
Yeah.
But
I gave him the book, and I'm like, you're just going to cry the whole time.
I'll tell you about the parts that actually made me cry later, but maybe we'll hear a little bit of the book, a sample from your book in your own words.
Sure thing. I'm going to read from the top of a chapter called So Many Questions, Most of Them Wrong. Other oft-asked questions in response to hearing the news that my brother David had died included, was he married, and did he have kids? These were delivered sometimes in lieu of, but surprisingly often in tandem with, were you close? Because the answers to these two questions were simple and factual, they were easier to spit out, no and no. But the internal processing was complicated. My gut reaction was always, why are you asking that? Does it matter? And then, angrily, feeling entirely invisible, oh, you're worried about some unknown wife and children instead of the person you know who's standing right here? Isn't that kind of you? Also, Cheryl is devastated, if you must know, but because they weren't legal, she was only a girlfriend. I guess she doesn't count. I know now that people are trying to demonstrate interest with good intention, and that these are the generic questions society has deemed acceptable to ask of people you don't know, but they aren't usually helpful and can often be extremely unhelpful.
Do you find that the questions people asked you about David when he was alive varied greatly from what they asked you once he passed away?
Oh, for sure. When he was alive, it was, what does he do? And what is he like? And how was your childhood? And, the kinds of things that I'd actually like to talk about.
Well, let's talk about that because we do get to know David pretty well from the book Were You Close? Tell us about David.
Well, he was heroic to me because he was 12 years older. He was handsome. He was funny. He was incredibly smart. He had a really scientific mind.
He was a doctor.
He was a doctor.
A radiologist.
He was a radiologist. He worked in the dark with x-rays and MRIs and things like that.
And then would go out into the light onto mountains and things.
Precisely, but also in the dark, light and dark. So, yeah, and he was always athletic, which is how he ended up meeting his fate in the great outdoors. But, we spent time as kids water skiing and hiking and doing all kinds of fun outdoor things, riding bikes, da-da-da. And so he just really took it to the extreme as an adult where he became overwhelmingly in love with running and cycling particularly, which turned into triathlons and ultra marathons and adventure racing and on and on and on.
I have to tell you that this book made me incredibly homesick because I went to high school in Colorado Springs. And so, we had a campus in Buena Vista and would often go to the sand dunes and further south to, the Collegiate Peaks and a lot of the other 14ers for, outdoor ed. And all of the locations in your book where you're connecting with the last places that your brother were made me feel incredibly just nostalgic and homesick for a place. I haven't been able to go back since I graduated because it's real expensive to get there. But it was so vivid. I could immediately see where you were and how it was placed. And I thought that was really, really cool. Do you still, in the end of your book, not that we're skipping around, but you mentioned that it's one of the more beautiful places that you've been, and that there was an interesting new connection coming to you with that place. Do you still feel that for that southeastern part of Colorado?
I do, absolutely. And Khalees is referring to the end of the book where I go back to the mountain where my brother died on the 10th anniversary of his fall. I really felt sort of wrong that I wasn't there last year on the 15th anniversary. I now have this sense that I'm supposed to go there and sort of in tribute. So I do have a trip planned this June with my best friend, and she's going to join me as we go back to the mountain. So it does call me. It really does. And I feel grateful that if there has to be this event and there has to be a place, that it is a place that's so beautiful and unique and moving to me.
We're speaking with Anne Pikerton from Northampton, whose new book is called Were You Close? A Sister's Quest to Know the Brother She Lost. And we've intimated about how David was an outdoorsy guy, very top-tier outdoors person that's not doing it professionally while having a professional life as a radiologist. And the question that prompts the whole book, Were You Close?, takes a look at grief in a way that a lot of books don't, because, grief is often depicted in circles and how close were you to the person. When a celebrity dies, some of us feel a certain amount of grief. So there's that end of the spectrum where we're not close at all. What's been some of the reaction you've gotten from people who have lost a sibling, who have lost somebody that may not be their spouse, or their parent, or, that coming at grief from this angle that gets overlooked, I think, in conversations about grief?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. It's certainly become a bit of a soapbox for me to talk about the fact that there's this hierarchy of grief, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, because it's perfectly natural to have feelings about a celebrity whose work you really connected with. Even though we don't know that person personally, it doesn't mean they haven't impacted our lives and that we don't feel something when they're gone. Similarly, I talk about all kinds of what we call disenfranchised losses once we kind of get into the terminology around grief. And unfortunately, sibling loss, which strikes me as being very close to home, it is really the only nuclear family relation that isn't treated with the same kind of acknowledgement or respect of another familial loss, like a spouse or a partner, child, And the thing is, brothers and sisters are people we sort of assume will know our whole lives. I mean, in my case, as the baby of the family, I was born into knowing this person, and I assumed they'd be around for the rest of my life. So in a way, it's a really massive loss. And this issue of whether you're close, I mean, I spend a lot of time in the book examining what that means, because it's obviously not about geography. Mm-hmm. It's about emotional connection or familial relation or whatever you feel about that person who's now gone missing. And I think that brothers and sisters really do get short shrift. There is a sense that we are here to take care of our parents in the aftermath. I mean, this happens to siblings who are young and adult. So it does feel very isolating, I think. And I've been really grateful that this book has done the one thing that I really set out to have it do, which is connect with other people who've been through this experience, who feel really, really lonely with their loss.
Do you feel that question ties into something else that you encountered in the book, which was the finite timeline people outside of your family wanted to put on your grieving process?
Yeah, I think that's a huge cultural thing that's was deemed even more problematic in the last couple of years when the DSM, which is the big mental health Bible, basically started determining that after 1 year, your grief was pathologized on some level. I mean, I'm not the first one to frame it that way, but
and this is a new development? This is not how they looked at it previously, or?
Well, a couple of years ago, and I could be getting that date wrong, so don't quote me, but in the recent past, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual for mental health workers really did change something to complicated grief if someone is still experiencing symptoms after 1 year, as if somehow a calendar page turn fixes everything. Yes, you would have gone through the first anniversary of a birthday or a Christmas or whatever was important with that person, but this notion that somehow you're going to just get to the other side and it will be cleanly over is entirely inaccurate. And I think anyone who's lost anyone ever knows that that's true. And there are always going to be things that remind you, that trigger you, that bring the grief back. You know, and here I am still talking about it. It's been almost 16 years since I lost my brother. And I'm just grateful to keep talking about it because for me, it keeps him alive and it allows, hopefully, others to feel like they aren't somehow broken in still feeling those feelings after a long time.
We're speaking with Anne Pikerton, whose new book is Were You Close? A Sister's Quest to Know the Brother She Lost. She's from Northampton. A lot of Northampton and the Valley are in this book, including your writing group and Bay Path College. Let's take a little break here. Oh, and some music, too, which we've got to get to because music is such a big part of your life. We'll talk more about all those things on the other side of the break.
Later in the show, the old folks who are the young at heart team up with the young folks who are old souls at the School for Contemporary Dance and Thought. We'll talk with director Jen Pollins and directors of the chorus Bob Silman and Julia Van Eycken.
And Congressman McGovern on the way, giving us his take on election 2024 post-New Hampshire.
But next, more with Anne Pikerton on her book, Were You Close? You're listening to The Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
I found your Were You Close playlist, so I put in all the musical bumps in there, which show up a lot in your book, Were You Close? Anne Pikerton from Northampton. Welcome back to The Fabulous 413. Anne joins us to talk about her book about grief in the loss of her brother. I think talk about why music is so important to what happened, especially in the direct aftermath of finding out that your brother had passed away after a fall while he was adventuring in a mountain in Colorado.
Sure. My life has been surrounded by music, as certainly my adult life, having been married to Peyton Pinkerton, who was part of New Radiant Storm King and Silver Jews, the latter of whom he was on tour with when my brother died. And somehow the universe threw me a bone, and he ended up being home the night that I got the call, which was a huge gift. And so I actually spent some of the aftermath running around with the band because they were going on to other cities, and I was really needing company, and they really embraced me and took me into their arms and let me hide away for a few days while I was kind of grappling with the immediate aftershocks.
And some of those song lyrics make their way into the book as part of your grieving process at these live shows. I believe the Iron Horse is in the book back when it was still open and will be open again very shortly.
Yes,
but
can't wait.
It also provided in some way, at least for me, like knowing about Silver Jews and what happens to David Berman, that there was that parallel of loss across the book. Like here is this band that was some support, and then there's implied for folks who are fans of the Silver Jews, the loss of David Berman at the towards the end of there too. Was that an intentional parallel put in, or did that just kind of feel natural and end up being there as part of both processes?
Well, it's not actually in there.
Yeah.
You know that because
you
know that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I
mean,
know
I
that because I
think
know that.
what's really interesting is that the manuscript was actually complete before that happened.
Oh, wow.
So that tells you how long it takes to get a book
No,
to market.
I'm aware.
Yeah, I know you are. It takes quite a long time, which shocks some people. But this manuscript was actually finished in a first draft in 2016, and then really finally got its shape in 2019 before we had that fateful event of losing our dear friend. It has been really interesting that is an undercurrent for me now. This other David in my life that we lost, and actually Peyton played my book launch party last year and played the song that I reference in the book called Pretty Eyes, which is one that always makes me cry and was really poignant for me when I was going through this experience freshly. So it was emotional again to talk about it during that event and to have him sort of present even in his lack of presence.
Let's hear a little bit more from your book. This is Anne Pikerton, Were You Close?
Sure. This chapter's called Closer. How do you rank closeness, if closeness can even be defined? When I considered the quality of David's and my closeness, or ranked our closeness, it only made my insides ache. Even after everything I read, wrote, studied, discussed, and explored, I sometimes felt unentitled to my pain and spent a lot of time and energy wishing David and I had been a lot closer than we ever were, that we had talked more, seen each other more, done more together, learned more about each other in general. It filled me with regret and longing. If David and I weren't as close as I wanted us to be, part of what made me extra sad was that I believed each year we were getting there, slowly but surely.
Can you talk about feeling closer to him after his passing than in these moments that you reference here?
Yeah, I think one of the strangest things about doing this project was how very, very close you can get to somebody even once they're gone. I think it's one of those things that can happen with anyone who loses somebody if they really are willing to look at it. Anyone who reads the book will know that I got kind of obsessive about it because I was desperate to understand who my brother was. And that's a weird thing to say. I did know him for 35 years after all. And yet, there are always things we don't know about each other. I didn't know that you had this formative experience in Colorado, Khalees. It's really cool to know that now. But I think especially his adventure life was something that we only experienced as a family kind of in highlights. You know, we would hear stories after he'd won a race or been on some grand adventure. And it never occurred to me to say, like, what drives you to do this? Why do you do such risky things? I mean, even as my mom and I would follow along online, charting his team's course when he was on one of these multi-day or even multi-week adventure races, I suppose part of us was a little nervous sometimes. I mean, we weren't in denial that what he was doing had some danger to it, but it wasn't always tinged with this, what if? And yet, it was completely predictable that this is the way he died. It was so predictable that I learned later he'd had conversations with his teammates about it extensively. It was how we learned really, really important things like that he wanted to be cremated, which we'd never talked about as a family, but he had this second family that he was really, really tight with. And, you know, as someone who's been in bands, you know what kind of chemistry and familial kind of bond you get. And I think they had that when they were out in these wild terrains doing all of these really extreme endeavors. They had lots of time to talk, and they clearly talked about life and death and everything in between. So yeah, I think it's very interesting that I think I can officially say I'm closer to my brother than I ever was, and that we continue to have a relationship. We're having a relationship right now.
Do you still have a subscription to Outside Magazine?
I do. And I still read it a lot.
And that's a way for you to feel more connected to the kind of life that your brother wanted to live.
For sure. For sure.
We're speaking with Anne Pikerton, whose book is Were You Close? You have another brother in the book, Tommy. Do you feel closer to your brother, Tommy, who also experienced a lot of these same questions that you did, where as a sibling, he's lost a sibling, but they ask how your mom's doing. They ask if he was married. Do you feel closer to your living brother, Tommy, because of going through this process of writing this book?
In ways I really do. I mean, I think that in the way that brothers and sisters all have very different relationships and are individuals like everyone else, we don't have a ton in common, but we do have this bond that we are left holding this ache, that we both loved him so immensely, and that we had the relationships that we had. So I am very grateful to him because he's one of the only people in the whole world that could ever know exactly what that was like.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the only person left who knows exactly what it was like. And so that's a big deal. And it does keep us bonded in a way that nothing else can. It's sort of a sad bond to have, but it's beautiful to have somebody who understands you that way.
I love when you talk in the book, and it kind of dates and shows you how long it's taken to come out, that you play Words with Friends with your brother Tommy.
You can still play this game. It's still around.
Yeah, but everybody does Wordle now, I guess. So,
That is true.
One word that came to light because of the book that I love, and I love words, and we should ask the word nerd about it, is perspicuity, which is not a word that I've heard about before, but I think is a big, important word for what this book and your brother's life is all about. Can you talk about that word and its inclusion?
I love talking about words. Thank you. What Monty's referencing is perspicuity. I mentioned in a chapter where I've read something by the fabulous writer Robert McFarlane, who wrote a book called Mountains of the Mind. And it talks a lot about the underlying psychology of the extreme adventurer or outdoor elite person who gets to this point of, why do we do it? And that really ended up being kind of an underlying question that I was asking all along the way, was, why did my brother do it?
Climb mountains, going on these adventures, these very dangerous things. Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
I mean, he scuba dove. Is that what you say?
Sure.
Scuba dived? Okay.
Attorneys General.
Whew. One of those. He did all kinds of stuff, the highs, the lows, everything in between. And I think there was this underlying question to me about, why was it worth it to risk everything? And Robert McFarlane says it was for the perspicuity, which I, of course, like you, had to go look up.
Yes.
But it sounds like its root, which is perspective. And it's for the perspective that only summiting a mountain can offer. And that really, especially as an original poet, was monumentally meaningful to me, pun intended, I suppose, because that's something I can really relate to, wanting to get perspective on something, wanting to see something from a different angle, to really get a view in a way that you can't get any other way. I mean, it's a lot of work to get to a top of a 14,000-foot mountain in Colorado, just for the view, just to go down again. And yet, that was something he really, really, really loved, because there was nothing like it. There was nothing else on earth in life that made him feel that way.
I love it. I love that this tragedy, which is very sad and comes across in the book, inspired you to go to Bay Path, to continue to hone your writing, to work with a writing group locally in the area who get thanked in the book as well, and to put out this book that I think is going to be really important to people who've lost somebody who isn't their spouse, who isn't their child, who isn't their parent. That's so often overlooked in the world of grief.
And frankly, just massively impressed that your brother did 3 14ers in a day. That's
nuts.
What
they call the peaks in Colorado.
Well, there's 15ers too. If it's at 14,000 feet, we get 14ers, and then there's some 15ers. But that's nuts. I've done Ontario, and I've done, again, collegiate peaks, but that was in my high school days, and it still took me the whole day. So getting through 3 of them, that's so impressive.
Well, and those are things I didn't know before I researched it, because I don't know what it's like to climb a 14er still, really. I mean, I haven't done it. You've at least done it. But yeah, I mean, that was what was so incredible to talk to people about, was that he thought nothing of I'm just going to bang out 3 of these. No biggie. I mean, to some extent, that's also the cautionary tale here. Maybe just 2, even if you're really fit.
And then sleep.
Yeah.
Take a little break.
Yeah.
Anne Pikerton, the book is Were You Close? You can buy it in our local bookstores here in the Valley. Anne Pikerton from Northampton. A sister's quest to know the brother she lost. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. What a delight.
It's a delightfully touching and fast read. So, yes, go out, enjoy, support your local artists.
Later in the show, we'll talk with the School for Contemporary Dance and Thought and the Young at Heart Chorus, who are partnering with each other.
And next, McGoverning with McGovern on New Hampshire, AI, abortion, and the soon-to-be open State House seat in his district.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. You're early today.
Oh, I am. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
no
sorry.
worries.
I just go, yeah.
I was just refilling my cup of coffee, and I was like, oh, it's ringing. Thanks for doing this. Let me find my glasses now.
My pleasure.
I don't know where I put them. Oh, they're on my head.
All right.
Classic. Time for our weekly check-in with U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, Worcester's own Congressman Jim McGovern, in a segment we like to call McGoverning with McGovern. You can ask your questions for the Congressman at thefab413 at nepm.org. We got a question coming up about the campaign, so let's start there. Iowa was last week. New Hampshire was this week. Trump looks to be unstoppable at the top of the GOP ticket, and yet in New Hampshire, Biden wasn't even an option on the ballot. For those who don't quite understand why that happened, do you want to explain why this is what the Democratic Party decided to do with their candidate for president of the United States, who is currently the president?
Yeah, they decided not to make New Hampshire the first in the nation primary on the Democratic side. But having said all of that, Joe Biden won against those running against him on the Democratic side in a write-in campaign. So I think what we know now, and what has become clear, is that the race in November will be between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I am not sure that Donald Trump can be stopped. I thought his performance on primary night in New Hampshire was scary. He seems deranged and just vicious. He attacked Nikki Haley on everything from her dress to he later tweeted that she was a bird brain. I mean, the idea that somebody who acts and behaves that way is the nominee of a major political party in this country is really frightening. But it looks like it's going to be a rematch between Biden and Trump.
At least temporarily, the campaign will move with some competition to South Carolina, the home state of Nikki Haley, who may or may not drop out before then, but unlikely to, it seems. She may give it one last go in her home state. But that is where the first official Democratic primary will be. Can you talk about the logic behind why the Democratic Party wanted South Carolina to be the first in the nation, despite New Hampshire having its own law saying that they need to be?
I think that they, again, this was not my decision, but I think they think that South Carolina is more diverse in terms of population and more reflective of the country in many ways. I mean, New Hampshire is not as diverse in terms of its population as South Carolina. And so I think they thought it was a better test of a candidate's national appeal than New Hampshire would be.
One of the things that was chilling from the New Hampshire primary was an audio recording of a robocall that went out that sounded exactly like President Joe Biden, basically telling people, don't vote now, it's not important, wait till November, which would be a message,
Right.
given that he was not on the ballot in New Hampshire, that could ostensibly be true. You are a member of a committee that is looking at AI. We had a conversation last year about the dangers of AI. What is the country doing to ward against things like these robocalls and a couple of deep fakes that I've actually seen just today in the Boston Globe? Is there anything that's happening that you're seeing from a legislative perspective to try to keep AI and deep fake out of this election cycle somehow?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure anything legislatively is going to pass between now and the election that's going to have an impact on the election, to prevent these things from happening. But I do know that the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security and, our law enforcement agencies are taking all this very seriously. I mean, they are investigating, what happened in New Hampshire. But I think it's a warning. It's a warning that you can expect some dirty tricks in the coming months. You can expect outside interference in the coming months as well. I mean, the spirit of Richard Nixon lives, and I think the fake call that allegedly was from Joe Biden saying "don't vote," I think that's just coming attractions, and so we all have to be vigilant. I know our law enforcement agencies and Homeland Security and Justice Department are going to be monitoring this stuff very, very carefully, but I would expect we're to see more of this.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, who joins us every week. Congressional Dems are pushing back on President Biden in his support for Benjamin Netanyahu in response to what's gone on after October 7th and the war in Gaza. You and 43 others signed a letter led by Representatives Raja Krishnamurthy and Jim Hines in Connecticut saying that you are continuing to support a two-state solution. The letter says, we're deeply concerned by Prime Minister Netanyahu's public rejection of a two-state solution and respectfully request that your administration outline a strategy to marshal international and ultimately Israeli and Palestinian support to successfully implement a two-state solution. As I mentioned, you did sign on to that letter. There's also a group of 18 members in a conference in an amendment led by Senator Chris Van Hollen that would set certain conditions on aid to Israel. Are you part of that Democratic letter to push back against the Biden administration?
Yeah, I do. I think it's I think it's reasonable to put conditions on our aid. Look, I've said this many times before. What happened on October 7th is inexcusable, is barbaric, was horrific. The people that were killed were innocent Israelis, again, many of them who were leaders in the peace movement. I've seen the videos of women who were sexually violated as well. I mean, it was disgusting, and we all should condemn that. But at the same time, we also need to understand that since that attack, 25,000 Palestinians have been killed, many of them women and children. The Netanyahu government has used what we call dumb bombs, big bombs, dropped in heavily populated areas, which has resulted in increased civilian casualties. We're now not only worried about people being killed by bombs in Gaza, but we're also now concerned that people are going to starve to death because it is still virtually impossible to get the kind of humanitarian aid and food to people who need it. So, Israel had a right to respond, but what they're doing at this particular moment and the way they're responding, I think, goes beyond the pale. Look, we need to be talking about how this ends in a way where there is a future that includes a secure Israel and a homeland for the Palestinians that is economically viable, that gives them a chance to have a better life. And that's where the discussion has to go. At some point, Gaza is just being destroyed. But at some point, this will stop. And then what happens? Does Israel formally and militarily occupy Gaza? I mean, if that's the case, you're going to see more violence, not only between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but between all these other proxy groups all around the world. And there's an opportunity now in the aftermath of this horrific tragedy where it seems that people are coming together to say, let's normalize relations with Israel. Those are a lot of the Arab nations that, quite frankly, have been hostile to Israel. But in return, we need a homeland for the Palestinians. And let's start a better future. I do not think it is unreasonable for the Biden administration to demand more of the Netanyahu government. And look, I think Hamas has exploited the Palestinian people for way too long. I don't see a future that is good for the Palestinians with Hamas in the leadership position. At the same time, I think Netanyahu has to go. He reminds me of Trump. I think he's saying and doing a lot of what we see right now, in large part to stay in office so he doesn't go to jail. And the sooner we can move beyond these individuals, I think the better for the people in the Middle East.
Any response from the Oval Office with this 2 letters from the Democrats trying to push back on Netanyahu?
Not yet. I think they were just sent out last week. But they know. We've had many conversations with the Secretary of State, with others in the close to the president about our concerns. And look, the goal here ought to be, how do we create a better future? And I think this is the moment where, if you really want to end this violence, it is more than just about a ceasefire, which I strongly support. I think if we get a ceasefire, maybe we get these hostages, out and back with their families safely. But it's more than, it has to be about what is the future and how do we do things differently, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, which right now is also a powder keg.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, McGoverning with McGovern, a question from Diana in Greenfield, who writes in and asks, with the 51st anniversary of Roe v. Wade just passed, and with Republicans losing on this issue in races around the country, why aren't Biden and the Democrats talking about this issue nonstop during their campaigning? Your thoughts on that, Congressman?
Well, Biden and the Vice President just did a big rally on this issue in Virginia. And I'm talking about it every chance I get. I'm posting things on my social media as much as I possibly can about this. But look, elections do matter. And we've seen the implications of Donald Trump's elections on a whole range of issues, but including on the issue of abortion rights. And you saw the court that he packed overturn Roe. And now you have individual states that are trying to tighten the restrictions on abortion rights as well. And we just had this March for Life rally last week in Congress, and they want even stronger national laws prohibiting abortion and criminalizing abortion and targeting women who have abortion. This is a scary time, and I agree with the caller that this has to be a central theme in this campaign. But I think they're trying to do that. And again, there was a huge rally on abortion rights that President Biden led in Virginia last week.
To one of our major issues, which is hunger and food security and food as medicine, you introduced a bipartisan bill that deals with metabolic disease and gastrointestinal conditions, allowing people to gain access to the nutrition they need to deal with that, with Representative Rutherford from Florida, who's a Republican. Talk to us about what this bill and what that would mean, and is, because it's bipartisan, is there a hope that it may actually pass?
Yeah, well, I hope it has a chance of passing, and I appreciate Congressman Rutherford's willingness to be part of this effort. But it brings me to a point that I just want to stress here. At the White House conference that you attended over a year ago, I mean, a big focus was about how food is medicine. And this next week, the Health and Human Services Department is actually hosting a follow-up conference to that White House conference on the issue of food as medicine, where some of the issues that we talk about in this bill will be addressed. But for whatever reason, our healthcare system has ignored nutrition and has ignored food, which makes no sense to me. You could become a doctor in this country and not have to take a course in nutrition. And I think I may have told you about my meeting with the New York City Mayor, Eric Adams, who told me that he had diabetes so bad that he was going to lose his eyesight and some of his toes, and he was told by his doctor that there was really nothing he could do. He met with another doctor who told him, if we change your diet, we might be able to reverse your condition, which he did, and his mother did as well. So the bottom line is that treating people for a variety of diseases and illnesses require not just a pill, right, but require access to specific kinds of food. And if we get this right, we can not only improve the quality of life for people who are battling from various health issues, but if that doesn't prompt you to do something and all you care about is money, it'll save a boatload of money to our healthcare system. And so, we're going to be focused on all these issues on Tuesday in Washington. I think it's Wednesday. I'm sorry, Wednesday in Washington, and I'll be anxious to tell you all the great results when we talk next Thursday.
Excellent. And I know that you welcomed our good friend Liz Ogilvie in Gardening the Community to D.C. this week to talk about small farms and how urban farming and how those can make better food systems in Massachusetts and beyond. So that is some good news. Another, a little bit of local politics that's almost outside of your wheelhouse, but maybe you've got some more dirt and scuttlebutt than we have on it. State Representative Dan Carey stepping down. He represents parts of your congressional district in D.C. Any thoughts, rumors, hopes, gossip about who will run for that open seat in November?
Well, I don't know, but Dan's a good guy. I mean, I've gotten to know him, and I've worked with him, and I appreciate his willingness to try to get stuff done. And I think he's been a good state rep. And so, but he's going to go on to hopefully something else, and we wish him well there. But I don't know who will run for that seat. But we have a very good legislative delegation out in Western Massachusetts, and I get to work with Natalie Blais and Joe Comerford and Lindsay Sabadoza, and these are great people to work with who care deeply about their constituents and who are always on the cutting edge of important issues and again are results oriented. But let me just say that it's been an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to work with Dan, and we'll see how it all works out.
U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts. You running again in November?
I am.
Okay, just checking. Worcester's own Jim McGovern. I don't know, when you have if somebody else starts running against you, we'll probably have to change the tone of this conversation and maybe have your opponent on as much as we have you on. This is a public radio station now, so we're going to be very, very fair and balanced about these.
Well,
things. So
absolutely. I mean, it's not that I'm universally loved.
Oh no, I look at all your Twitter comments. You are not.
And not all of them are from my wife, right?
Right.
Anyway, but thank you, and have a good rest of the day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Congressman. You can always ask your question for the Congressman for this segment at thefab413@nepm.org. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Always good to talk to you. Be safe.
Up next, the School for Contemporary Dance and Thought presents the Hatchery Young Artist Performance Project in Labyrinth.
With David Bowie?
It's not all about Bowie Monty or cod pieces, but the Young at Heart Chorus. We'll talk with School for SCDT Director Jen Pollins and Bob Silman and Julia Van Eycken from Young at Heart.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, homegrown in Hatfield, Massachusetts, and providing energy savings for their customers for over 10 years. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Monty Belmonte.
And I'm Khalees Smith. The School for Contemporary Dance and Thought is made up of independent, internationally experienced teaching artists who bring an abiding respect for the traditions, histories, and evolution of dance with the mission to continue challenging established ideals.
SCDT offers adult and youth programming and dance training, and this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the School for Contemporary Dance and Thought presents the Hatchery Young Artists Performance Project in Labyrinth. You remind me of the Babe, where, well, I mean, maybe they do because they're young people. These young performers will team up with the much older performers who hopefully you met on Monday's show, if you didn't know them before, the Young at Heart Chorus. I like to call them the Valley and the world's favorite octogenarian rock and roll chorus.
Joining us is School for Contemporary Dance Thought Director Jen Pollins and Young at Heart co-directors Bob Silman and Julia Van Eycken. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All of you, actually, you've all been here
You've
before.
all been here on the show.
But never together.
And you gave us a little hint about this project when we had you on Monday, Julia, where it's just kind of happenstance how this came together. But remind our listeners how these young folks at SCDT are teaming up with the old folks where the average age is in the mid-80s with Young at Heart.
Remind you guys of how it happened?
Yeah.
Well, we just bumped into Jen after a rehearsal. We happened to be rehearsing in the same space. And she came up to us and was like, hey, let's collaborate.
I was waiting for you.
Yeah.
The truth comes out.
There we go.
And so how long have the different parts been working together and rehearsing for this?
Since September.
Oh, wow.
I remember hot summer days.
Oh, right.
When it started.
So a good long time. And what about, oh, go ahead.
Oh, and this is the second time that you've collaborated with Young at Heart. There was a performance in November where you collaborated also. How is this performance going to differ from that previous performance in the fall?
Jen Pollins.
Well, we sort of swapped. So November, we were guests at the Young at Heart show at the Academy of Music, along with many other fabulous dancers. Mm-hmm. And this time, the Young at Heart is guests at our performance at 33 Holly Street in the new, renovated, shiny, nicely smelling, like a new car, workroom theater.
Which we had those folks on to talk about the opening of that. Tell me, Jen, what some of the perspective you've been getting from the young people you're working with in Labyrinth about working with the Young at Heart Chorus members.
Yeah, I think that it's been great and very different. We were just talking about this in the glass room as we were waiting.
That's kind of like our waiting room, our green
Right.
room. The fishbowl.
I think that it's really important and unusual for them to have so much contact, and especially like rehearsal contact and experience with older generations of people. So it's been great and very different for them to be working in with a chorus, with live music, and they've loved it.
Because while Young at Heart has a band, it's going to be young people in the band doing this show, right?
Yeah, so we're super excited about our pit band, which started at the Academy of Music in May, and they learned the 5 songs that the Young at Heart chorus will be doing, and will be accompanying the chorus, which is very exciting. So it's a young group of musicians as well.
That's great. Now, Bob Silman, the founder and director of Young at Heart Chorus, tell us about what some of the older folks you work with in the chorus have been saying about working with these young dancers.
Well, I think they love that they can kick their legs a lot higher than.
There is some limited Young at Heart choreography.
No, there's limiting. It's Young at Heart is interesting when they stand up. So
yes, I think so too.
But no, it's great to see that level of dance. And when you're doing a song like we do with the band song, Life is a Carnival.
Oh, yeah.
And to have these young dancers turn it into a carnival, it's just kind of an amazing thing to watch. And it makes them sing better.
That's cool. Like, how else do collaborations like these work with Young at Heart Chorus? Like, not just with intergenerational groups like this, but beyond.
Well, it's always interesting. I mean, a lot of times the people we ask to collaborate with us don't necessarily know anything about us. So there's a lot of oh, what am I getting into? But then they kind of show up and they say, oh, this is kind of cool. I like this. This is great. We had in the November show, we had a woman named Harley Fox who did go-go dancing.
Yep.
And
1960s go-go dancing.
1960s.
Yeah. Not like strip clubs.
Yeah.
go-go dancing.
Wow, wonderful.
Amazing.
Thanks
She's
for
a friend of
clarifying
mine.
that. But it was like you could just see her light up to the music that was being presented, and then she danced to Dance to the Music, I Want to Take You Higher, which the chorus does really well. And
just heard a little sample of it on the intro there. Yeah,
there you go. So it's always an interesting process to watch. It's like, the thing about the chorus is everybody goes, oh God, old people doing my music. How dare they? And then they sort of come and hear it and they say, oh, wow, they're taking this in an interesting direction. And that's what happens with a lot of people, especially people who work with us. There's a little bit of an intrepidation, but then they totally go for it. And the chorus is very welcoming to people who want to work with them. So that works.
We're speaking with Bob Silman and Julia Van Eycken from the Young at Heart Chorus, which is now artist in residence at AIC in Springfield, and Jen Pollins from SCDT, based in Northampton. This is also not the music of the young people that you're working with. I saw an incredible preview video of Evelyn Harris doing Something Happened in Here, Stop, Look, What's That Sound? That's an important song in the 1960s. And for her, who was part of Sweet Honey in the Rock, what's that experience been like doing that kind of music, the rock and roll of the 60s and 70s for these younger people?
Well, these kids are pretty alternative. They're not just plugged into the present moment, a lot of them, just being part of an alternative experimental school. I'm always surprised by their music choices. But that song just gives us the chills every time to be able to dance to her voice and that
amazing.
song.
Yeah.
That will end the portion of the Young at Heart with Hatchery, and it's really quite amazing.
Been such an amazing addition to Young at Heart.
Yeah.
Because she's just a great singer, but she's also very, very thoughtful and wonderful with the rest of the members, and really supportive of everybody. So.
Jen Pollins, can you talk about the theme of Labyrinth for this particular piece in the last couple of minutes that we've got?
Yeah. So Labyrinth is like a maze, right, of different difficulties and roadblocks and slows us down on our path to have to navigate and negotiate and appreciate also the moments that aren't as easy. And the kids are dealing with a lot of subjects in this piece. They make all of their own work. So I was talking to Bob and Julia, and every season is a brand new world premiere of new pieces that have never been done before. So this body of work we're always looking for a good title, and it felt like an appropriate title for the diversity of work that is being shown with the kids. Yeah.
And it's not just with Young at Heart Chorus, so there'll be 5 songs with them and then more.
Yeah, the show's about an hour and a half. There's about 10 pieces that the kids made. And we're also working with Youthful Expressions from Springfield, who we met at the show at the Academy in November, and we're starting to collaborate with them, so they'll come and show a few pieces on Sunday as well. So it's a big, fun, wild event.
I love how this community has built up by kind of happenstance, same rehearsal spaces, a fortuitous, serendipitous encounter, and now all of a sudden 2 shows with Young at Heart and School for Contemporary Dance and Thought and other partners from all that. It's
Collaborations are where it's at.
They sure are. And you can see this one Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of this week at the Northampton Community Arts Trust building on 33 Holly in Northampton.
And then next Thursday, you can come to AIC and watch Young at Heart at the Esther Theater. I can't remember her last name.
Yeah,
Griswold.
Esther Griswold.
Esther
Yeah, it's a
Theater.
great
Way
theater.
up on State Street.
It is a great theater.
Everybody raves about the lunch there, too. So
It's really good. And cheap.
Just came from that.
We are the hype people for the lunch at AIC. Bob Silman and Julia Van Eycken from Young at Heart and Jen Pollins from SCDT. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
We swear we're going to crash your rehearsals, not just because
Not
we
just because
get
of the lunch.
get went to lunch.
Yeah, also Evelyn Harris. Friday on the Fabulous 413, more intergenerational art as we head to the Art for the Soul Gallery to find out about their youth social justice art workshops. Executive Director Rosemary Tracy Woods and instructor Jason Montgomery join us to explore how learning new art can encourage larger changes in the world.
Plus, for Live Music Friday, Misty Blues will descend from the mountains to bring their low delta sounds to the studios, and the Wine Thunderdome becomes bucolically bacchanalian as we drink Greek.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith. We'll see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.
My love for you.